right, everybody. Greg Lake here, CEO entheogenic, Theogen Church Attorney. This is my law partner, Ian Benouis, who also works with me on helping people what we call enshrine their rights under the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. Thanks for joining me today, Ian.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Yeah, I know we talk every day, but now we're going to record it. Just because we have a special issue to cover today. And I know that a lot of people in this space, a lot of people whose religious spiritual practice revolves around the sacramental consumption of entheogens is going to probably have heard or felt the effects of what I'm about to say. And that's today we're here to talk about the seizure of sacraments, particularly ayahuasca, and particularly coming from South America at the U.S. border. And then we're also going to discuss a little bit is that it's actually started to being seized in these foreign countries, right, before it even leaves. So we're going to kind of explore that issue, see what might be happening there and what, if anything, could be done. So just start out, just to briefly mention that, under the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, and we're just going to discuss federal law today, sincere religious practitioners are able to sacramentally consume ayahuasca. This is per the UDV decision. This is per the Santo Daime opinion. So sincere religious practitioners can consume sacramentally entheogens, particularly ayahuasca, unless the government has a compelling governmental interest, prevent such, right? So as we know from the UDV and Santo Daime opinions, the government, the last two times this has gone to court, has been unable to show that there's a compelling governmental interest in preventing the sacramental consumption, particularly of ayahuasca. So obviously in the wake of these opinions, many groups who, have adopted this either from South America here as a religious practice, have been holding ceremony, have been, forming churches, doing everything correctly. But I guess starting in about a year and a half, 2 years ago, a lot of sacrament got seized, and it just got from my understanding, got progressively worse as time has gone on to now. A lot of people are having trouble locating, sacrament, and holding ceremony. And so, yeah, we're just going to come here today just to kind of briefly talk about these issues. First thing I wanted to kind of highlight is, okay, so under the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, it's a claim or defense. Okay, but that doesn't mean that your religious rights are contingent upon, the government or a court telling you that, oh yeah, you can practice your religion, right? This is just a law that's used whenever your rights are substantially burdened, or if in a criminal matter, this could be asserted as a defense as well, right? So theoretically, under the law, technically, I mean, people would be entitled, without going to court, theoretically, to receive sacrament of ayahuasca right across the border. Well, we all know that the government, and particularly the DEA, is not too fond of dealing with religious practitioners and being kind or giving them the rights that theoretically and technically they have under the law. So here's kind of the conundrum is that, well, we are practicing in accordance with our rights in America, per the UDV decision, Santo Daime, Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. But yet we have yet to go sue the government, right? For the court to declare you are exempt, and therefore you can for sure practice. DEA work with these people to get their sacrament, because we know in both the UDV and Santo Daime cases, the government actually raided, the churches, the organizations here in the United States, right? So this wasn't as a consequence of stuff being stopped at the border, right? These are kind of new issues that we're seeing pop up, and I have to say, and we're going to also touch on the Yahe litigation. We're also going to touch on SoulQuest litigation, because both of those kind of touch on this issue. But one thing I wanted to point out, and this is just my impression, again, we're talking from a lot of people who've had their sacrament seized, and that's one, it was never properly labeled, right? So this coming across the border, this ayahuasca isn't labeled ayahuasca or Yahe, or much less have the actual ingredients of what's in the concoction listed on the package. So why does that create an issue? Does it create an issue? Well, in my opinion, it does. And that's because under federal law, okay, anything that comes across customs that's mislabeled meaning that what's indicated on the label or on the shipping form is different than what's in the actual package, well, then it entitles the government to seize it, indefinitely. And not only that, if you read the statute, and I'll try to drop a link or a citation to that statute in the video description, but it basically says that, if you're knowingly involved, if they can show you're knowingly involved in this mislabeling issue, I think it's like up to 2 years in federal penitentiary and up to a $10,000 fine that could be had. So, yes, we have a lot of sacrament that's been seized, but we also, in my opinion, in my belief, have a lot of sacrament that was also mislabeled. So, I said to say this is that, yes, you theoretically still have a valid claim in court, theoretically, but appearing and showing up and say, hey, that was, that's my sacrament that's over there mislabeled that you took, right? Well, that kind of creates this catch-22. It's like, yeah, you want to step up and assert your right, but at the same time, and more likely the government would probably try to press charges then, because, more or less through court pleadings, civil court pleadings, you would have to pretty much admit that what's in there, right? And then they would try to draw, parallels to show that you're knowingly involved in this. So, there's probably most of the sacrament seized, I would be willing to bet people don't have a good claim for it. Not saying they don't have a claim, that's just not a real good one, because it's you got this catch-22 where you mislabeled it, or whoever mislabeled it, and theoretically they can seize it forever. So where does that leave us? So you say, well, how do I get sacrament? What if I label it, they're going to keep it. And that's probably correct. Yeah. So, really under the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, and this also bleeds into Tanzan decision, which for those who don't know, in the Tanzan decision, the U.S. Supreme Court held that if a federal government official substantially burdens your religious freedom, you can sue them personally in court for money damages, right? So let's kind of play this out on a hypothetical. So let's say hypothetically, and let's discuss some facts that are close to the UDV and Santo Daime. Okay, so let's say you have, for instance, an ayahuasca church based in Texas, who has a direct connection or lineage to a South American tribe in Colombia. Okay, and let's say that this church tells its people in South America, hey, label this correctly, put sacrament, put the name, let's say Yahweh, and let's put the plant ingredients on there. You know what I mean? Full disclosure. This is my religious sacrament coming across. Here's what it contains. That's what we see at customs. So let's just imagine that situation. Well, for one, and again, more than likely they're gonna, obviously, if it's labeled as such, unless there's just get real lucky that you get by some border guards who are just, or customs officials who are just completely unaware, they're more than likely going to keep it. But let's think about this suit here, because now, in my opinion, you do have a valid Tanzan claim, right? Because now, not only do they not necessarily have the right to seize it per se under the other law that's mislabeled, they can indefinitely hold it. Now, and I just figured this out not too long ago, is that customs actually has 90 days to hold anything coming across the border, right? So, now you got to you are subject to this 90-day window, but after that, theoretically, you would want the government to hand it over, but, they're probably not going to do that. So where are we at? So that means that this church is probably, if they want to continue their religious practice, because obviously when the sacrament's taken, I think it's fair to say the substantial burden requirement has been met, right? And I know that there's some circuit differences here on what exactly constitutes substantial burden, but I think in that instance, it's absolutely met. And so on top of that, we have the Tanzan now. So now you have something properly labeled. Now they keep it. Well, that shows that they were knowingly involved in substantially burdening your religious freedom. So I think you have a fairly clean Tanzan claim for the amount, I would argue, the amount of donations lost from the seizures. So, the thing is that, and this is the unfortunate circumstance in our law, religious law right now, is that yeah, you can have an ayahuasca church perfectly practicing, in accordance with what we know from Supreme Court precedent, and by all appearances should be exempt. But unless they go to court and sue the government and have the federal judge tell the government to work with them, well, then how are they going to practice, right? And we all know that these types of lawsuits take quite a bit of money to litigate. So all in all, to a certain degree, religious rights are contingent on the amount of money that a church or a group or organization who, in this instance serves ayahuasca, it's kind of contingent on that. And so, this is kind of the issue that we're facing. So how do we address this? And I'm sure you're aware, Ian, there's the Church of the Eagle and the Condor who had Sacrament seized, I think almost 2 years ago. And Chacruna kind of picked up that issue. And from what I know to date, they've sent some Freedom of Information Act requests to the government asking about, seizures at the border. And they got some numbers and wrote some articles, but I'm not sure that it has proceeded beyond that point. But I feel like it's probably very important that some case come, okay, to challenge this issue, to try to push this issue, because hopefully the resolution of that case might shed some further light on how other churches who aren't necessarily exempt from the court should proceed on these issues. So what's your take on it?
Yeah, right. And I think the DEA had come out with those guidelines they had up for a while, and then they took those down. And so none of us really know what the rules of the government are because it's under the executive branch. And until somebody asserts their rights, yeah, it's just been too long where we've all been on defense, all hiding out. And it's no longer as convenient for people to go to Peru or Costa Rica or even Mexico. Yeah. And that's why I think both you and I have seen, right, this big rise in the churches. It's because people are like, well, how else do I get these natural medicines? I need them. They're the pathway. That's the community, the efficiency of the medicine and getting it to people. So, yeah. And,
I like what you said is that all we can do is sit here and estimate what the government's up to, right? We never really know, like you say, until a suit's filed, some discovery is undertaken. Do we really start to uncover where they're at? And with that being said, again, we can sit here and surmise all day, but we'll never really know, until someone actually gets there and sues them. And so it's interesting because, again, with the labeling issue, and there's been a lot of sacrament come across the border mislabeled, but
that's what the Chacruna, right, the Freedom of Information request showed. Something like 1,000 shipments for DMT, I think, or maybe it was 1,000 total. In any case, it was a lot, and like the government took a break because of COVID and turned it back on, but kind of somewhat random, right, as far as just some. And I know of people with packages sent from Peru that had San Pedro, right, Huachuma in there, along with Mapacho, the Peruvian tobacco, and they had taken out the San Pedro and put it in, and kept the shipment going. And then we know another thing is that even the Mapacho falls under this because it's crossing the border, ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and really bringing in tobacco without a license is a potential offense as well. So, there's sort of this random taxation where they're just, seizing some things, just holding on to them. And it sort of reminds sort of like the Marijuana Tax Act, where you had to pay the stamps on your marijuana, but then showing that you had the marijuana was going to get you in trouble because it was illegal. So, but you still had it.
It's another situation like that. And, here's one other, we can sit here and kind of guess where the government's at. My view is this. Is that for them to seize all that medicine, and you already know that they probably see several packages, multiple packages trying to go to one address, right? But all we've really seen, very, very, very few arrests. We've seen some door knocking. Okay, I heard of a door knock, actually with Huachuma, door knock where the Homeland Security came to the gentleman's door and basically was just like, look, we have these pictures of these packages that we know were sent to you.
Mhm.
Just to let you know your address is flagged. And then that was it, right? And I knew of another San Pedro deal where the Homeland Security came up and just questioned and just let them know, like, hey, we know what you're up to, stop it type thing. But it begs the question, so why isn't the government arresting these people? And my point of view on it is this, is that for a lot of people these days who are, again, practicing, I would argue, correctly under religious freedom and restoration, I think the government knows that for a lot of these people, they would have an uphill battle to fight as far as winning a case if someone's going to assert a valid religious defense, right? And so, and that probably coupled too with the fact that they don't want to expend the resources to even try to prosecute these cases because it's so low priority.
Yeah. And you've got Soul Quest in existence, right, and featured in movies and Kentucky ayahuasca on TV. So the government's, knows what's going on, and right, it's taking generally a hands-off approach.
Mm-hmm.
Except the stuff comes across the border, that's still the wild card,
Mm-hmm.
and you could basically get your name on a list.
Yeah. Well, and so when you speak about Soul Quest, here's an interesting factoid there. So obviously when you read the DEA letter, it basically, the DEA says that they know exactly how Soul Quest got its medicine. They know they were sending it to an alternate address,
from some head shop in the Netherlands.
Yeah, it was a head shop in the Netherlands, send it to some address. And don't get me lying, I think maybe in Illinois or New York or something, but don't quote me on that. And then it got shipped to Soul Quest, right? And so the DEA basically stated that they knew this, but somehow, some way, Soul Quest is still serving medicine every month, so obviously they're still getting it, right? And so, I will say this, the website, the head shop in the Netherlands that the DEA mentions, Waking Herbs, if you go on their website now, they actually have a USA warehouse now, to where I'm assuming, they actually have a USA warehouse now. So it's some
salvias and some dream herbs. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy. And then this is good to note, in the Arizona Yahe case, now the judge denied their request for preliminary injunction, but gave them right to amend their I won't say petition, but it's a complaint, to amend their complaint.
Yeah.
Because basically what the judge said is that, see, they argued they had previous shipments that were seized, right? Well, the judge, and that's what they were claiming as far as needing a temporary injunction, right? They're like, we've had Sacrament seized. If we don't get that Sacrament back, this is going to be basically a substantial burden, but also, when we're talking about preliminary injunction, you have to show like a real and substantial harm is either has occurred or will occur. And the judge said, no, these shipments were shipped a long time ago. There really hasn't been any objection made. And more or less, it's because basically your chance to try to object and get these shipments has kind of passed as far as proving a real and imminent harm, right? So it was so kind of remote that now that's not really posing that, okay? And so what judge said is that in order, and this is at least under Ninth Circuit precedent, that in order to show a real substantial harm in this area, they're going to have to allege that they plan to violate the Controlled Substances Act again sometime in the future, right? Like a real concrete plan. What I would imagine is that they need to amend and say, okay, judge, we plan to have another shipment come in the month of June, one to come in July, August, and show that they have concrete plans to also violate the Controlled Substances Act. So that's interesting how this all plays out. So what that kind of tells me too is that if you're a legitimate religious organization, church or group, or you're basically practicing in accordance with the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, and you get Sacrament properly labeled that's seized, it's probably better to sooner than later go after it, right? Because I think after a while, especially if you admit that you have not practiced since the shipment got seized, well, that might also go towards your sincerity. right? If you completely quit after this, sacrament gets
Yeah.
seized and a long time goes, well, the government could say, well, judge, look how long they waited to go after the sacrament, right? It's not, obviously there's sincerities in question. So that's just another angle of it too that I was wanting to point out. But it's interesting to see how this is going to pan out. Now,
Yeah.
there's also been some. I'll go ahead.
No, I was asking you, what do you think? Like, isn't this whole, well, at least crossing the border aspect of diversion, just going to drive people to grow more of all this that's already growing in Hawaii, growing in southern Puerto Rico, right? And this is the whole thing with, you can go buy San Pedro at Amazon and we can get it here. So it seems like when the government clamps down, just you get more closet growers and whatnot. So.
Well, and what their argument on that is, so kind of what they said in Soul Quest is that, in the UDV and Santo Daime opinions, and they're correct, they got their sacrament from co-religionists, okay, back home. And so, the DA tried to make an issue about Soul Quest with that. It said, oh, well, they're cooking it themselves and, they're not getting it from co-religionists, blah, blah, blah. But, my take on that is that really, especially if you're cooking it with prayer and intention and all that, like you actually doing that is more of a religious type thing than, in a sense, having other people do it and send it to you, right?
Absolutely.
As far as the actual organization is concerned. But yeah, so we are, and so a lot of people, I guess Hawaii is a main place. I think there's areas in Florida and maybe some other areas in the United States where actually the ayahuasca vine can grow and both chacruna can grow, when we're talking about ayahuasca. But yeah, I think that now it's kind of time to a move to doing more cultivation here, which I agree with. I think that's great. And again, the other option has been the Waking Herbs website. So I don't know, but we hope this gets resolved. There has been sacrament seizures lately that were properly labeled, and there are likely people that are about to assert some claims, in those regards. And so, whether that will resolve the issue across the board, I don't know. I tend to think it probably won't. I think it's going to take several more groups asserting their rights before the DEA even considers coming to the table, to try to negotiate this out. Which I will say this: Gary Smith has offered the best solution to this problem that I've heard. He said this: all the DEA needs to do is have a simple attestation registration process wherein you attest to the DEA that you are a sincere religious practitioner. Here is what your sacrament is. Here's how you use it in ceremony, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here's how you plan to acquire it. And basically the DEA then would give you a control number and let you go about getting your sacrament across the border. But the thing is that in the instance that the DEA feels that someone is being untruthful or insincere, well, then they can go follow up on that person and investigate. And if that is actually comes to be true, well, then they have an extra perjury charge against the person. So I really think that is extremely valid. And I think that's a system that would be fair, meaning protect sincere versus, from non-sincere religious practitioners. At the same time, allow people to get their sacrament across the border. But again, how far we are away on reaching something like that is unknown. But I sure hope that one day we can reach that, or some legislation can be passed to help clarify rights and obligations, in this area. Because yeah, it sucks because there are a lot of very sincere practitioners here and adherents here in the US who are struggling to hold ceremony and to practice their religion the way that they had been. So, lastly, we know that there's a possibility that the US government has actually been reaching across international borders to a lot of these countries in South America and requesting that they seize the sacrament before it leaves the host country. And we think that because of, several people have reported that especially Brazil has been taking, not letting the sacrament leave, basically confiscating it before it even leaves the country. And unfortunately, in one case, possibly have arrested someone, right, for sending multiple packages. So yeah, and that's kind of my thoughts on it. Obviously, you say, well, how are they pressuring? Well, we know the U.S. government gives other governments tons of money, right? So I'm sure the governments of South America are no different. But well, what really crossed my mind was that the 1971 UN treaty on psychotropic substances, the same one that the government argued it has a compelling governmental interest in enforcing in both the UDV and Santo Daime opinions. Might that be the treaty that they're using to go and put pressure on these governments? I don't know. But it sure does seem like after so many years of packages consistently coming out of these foreign countries, that all of a sudden now, in tandem with the spike in seizures at our border, they're now taking affirmative action against these things. So it's interesting. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, what do you think about this? Don Jose Campos, right? He had been arrested a number of years ago in France, was successfully defended, but looking in that scenario, but possible, long-term jail sentence. And he was recently arrested in Mexico, right, with ayahuasca, and the Mexican authorities have him in jail and are at least saying that he could be looking at 10 years in Mexican prison. What what do you make of some of these things like you're talking about at international levels with things like that?
And that was real surprising to me too, because generally in the space, Mexico is known to be a friendly country that basically people doing religious practice there, they're just like pretty much hands off, right? And I think all drugs are decriminalized for personal use there, or maybe legal.
Yeah, exactly. Through Supreme Court decisions. So it's all personal drug use is constitutional. They've been supposed to have rolled out this recreational program, and and it still hasn't happened. But and at the same time they're arresting this person and using words like drug trafficking, right? That's just kind of scary.
Yeah. Well, and that is scary, but I guess to me, working in the space so long, it's when you're serving in a sacred ceremony, that's really not distribution, right? That's theoretically under US law anyways. And so it is troubling to me to see them put labels like that on somebody who's merely serving in ceremonies, but I don't know what happened with his case. I know it kind of has sent shockwaves through the space. I do believe they are collecting money to help his legal defense. So if anybody feels compelled, please, and I'm not sure on the internet where it is, but there's, I think, a GoFundMe and
there's a GoFundMe.
To donate. And look, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. This is, even though obviously with our work, we really focus in the US, this is really a worldwide thing, right? And what happens one place in one way or another incidentally affects what happens in another. So, and again, was the US involved in pressuring the Mexican government to arrest him? I don't know. I don't know.
It's hard to know.
But it could also be his previous arrest in France might have spurred it.
And it just shows the U.S. government's using immigration, things like immigration, right, to pressure other things that it has issues with, like the plant medicine stuff.
That's a great point.
What do you think about the whole changes in Texas? As like everyone's wondering what my rights are, decriminalization, different countries. Texas with these changes to the Constitution, where churches are even more protected. So let me ask a question called: if you're here in if you're here in Texas and you're making your medicine locally, and people can't come up to your ranch and buy it over the fence, but they're coming and doing the medicine. How can the government mess with you, or maybe why would the government mess with you?
Well, that's a good question, and that kind of goes along with what we say all the time, is that really the only point of interference that we truly see is at the border, is seizing. So I venture to say that as long as a church or a group is practicing correctly, as a sincere religious practitioner, and they're either sourcing or growing their own sacrament in the US, the probability of them ever being interfered with is very, very low. It's this sending sacrament across the border, creating a paper trail, that, and again, we don't hardly see any arrest, but it's the point of interference, and it's where they just take your sacrament to where you can't. And again, my true belief is because I think the government realizes that with a good majority of these groups, they would have an uphill battle trying to, overcome a religious use defense. And so that's why they're doing all that they can just to take the sacrament, because I think they know that there's a good chance with a lot of these groups that they're not going to be able to win. But that kind of goes back to resources. Does the group have the resources to even assert a religious defense, right? And that's, I would encourage anybody, who's in this space, especially people getting sacrament across the board, to put money back for legal fees, because eventually, if you don't have it, then you're kind of going to be stuck. Because again, even if you properly label it, doesn't mean that they're gonna hand it over. Chances are they probably won't. And so when that contingency comes, you got to kind of make a judgment call. Do we want to proceed and go let the court decide this, or what exactly do we do? So yeah, I've always encouraged, look, save money for legal fees. I'm not saying because I'm a lawyer, you don't have to hire me, but save some money for legal fees, because in the time that your practice becomes substantially burdened, you might be looking at either pursuing it in court or giving up. And I think there might be some people almost there right now. And so we just hope and pray that this issue can be resolved and people can keep practicing.
Right. Yeah. Well, SoulQuest might know what's going on for them this year, right? That's a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And two, maybe if both SoulQuest and Arizona Yahe reach favorable decisions, maybe that will spur the DEA to try and work something out with people. Remains to be seen. But I think right now what's really needed is a suit on a direct seizure, recent seizure, meaning they seize properly labeled sacrament, wait 90 days, send a letter. If they haven't turned it over, send a letter, give them 30 more days to turn it over, and then go to the courthouse and file suit in federal court. I think that's the case that's going to need to come to really figure this out, or at least get some clarification or some knowledge, wisdom on where the government's at and what they're doing.
Right. I mean, it's kind of it's a Boston Tea Party kind of issue as far as that's how the government's playing. I'm going to control your sacrament by treating it as a drug. And if you mislabel it, I can pop you for that and just take your stuff. And then you've got to put it above board.
Yeah.
And they're still taking it. This is the only way to have it all out and say, no, you're treating my sacrament as a drug, but you're doing improper to customs level. And that would also show why they would be pushing it further downstream. And we both know, like you said, shipments in Brazil and Peru that just never made it out of the country that were destined for the US because they were seized there. So that would make sense for the government to just push that forward. And then they're not putting their Customs and Border Patrol agents personally liable for handling this, because what you're saying exactly is if a properly labeled package comes through from Mother Church with ayahuasca, what's that made out of? And then to the church in the US, there's a lot of people that can get individually named, and that's not going to be good for the government.
And it seems too, just judging by the SoulQuest, when I look at the difference between SoulQuest, Arizona Yahe pleadings on the government's end, especially with the DA letter, they're definitely, like, I think they're definitely gonna come after you, but they're definitely gonna seize it if you don't have a mother church sending it to a sister church here, just like the UDV in Santo Daime, right? Where mother church in Brazil sends to sister church in US directly. That's the only situation that the DA knows, right? And that's the only ones that have been directly ruled on in case law. So, some of these churches, which is, look, I have no problem with whether they're lineage based or not, people practice how they practice, but there are a lot of them without a strict lineage tie to South America and kind of get, medicine sent from whoever they know down there. It doesn't not necessarily co-religionists, right? And so, I would imagine the government, especially in that instance, isn't going to hand it over, even though I don't think they're going to hand it over in the first instance, regardless. And then also, and I meant to bring this up earlier, is that they're using immigration issues and other issues to try to get, especially people who are up here serving sacrament from South America. They're using those laws to try to and to pick people up and deport them based on immigration issues versus address them in court, right? How they should. Let's get them out of here before they're able to show up and put up a fight in federal court. So we've seen some of that too. And that's another thing is, the people serving here from South America, it's crazy.
They're at risk.
Yeah. Unfortunately, because it's one of those things where they're going to deport them and then they're going to make sure they never come back.
Yeah,
this isn't going to be somewhere they're going to have a chance to come back. Well, the government's going to tell judge, and they're here serving Schedule I substances, blah blah blah, without really going into the merits of the religious issue. And judge is probably going to permanently deport them. And that's happened that we're aware of.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we know that with the ayahuasca healings case and Trinity de Guzman, where he talked about they were going to have all these churches in the U.S. right under this under these freedoms, but the U.S. government was like, well, we don't think so, and none of you are U.S. citizens, so we're going to permanently bar all of you from coming to the country. Not so much to even like you're trafficking in these Schedule I drugs, but you're talking about them way too much and getting people all hyped up. So no, thank you, and forever.
Yeah.
So in your scenario with the property label, you still have to have somebody that was a citizen that could go both ways in the U.S. wasn't facing that threat, right?
Yeah.
Or was living here permanently, I guess, and wasn't going to leave the country.
Yeah.
That's what the government can do, though. Get you on one side of the border, and then you're worried about your ability to get back in.
Yeah, no, kind of grabbing for straws, whatever they can. Again, to me, it's indicative of their mindset that for a lot of these people, they're not going to be able to necessarily win, or at least and this is what I think is that perception. They look at a lot of these places have established churches. They know they're holding ceremonies, by all appearances, sincere religious practitioners. So right there, the government knows that they're going to be able to fill their burden under the religious laws, right? And then as it relates to ayahuasca, hell, back in 2006, the U.S. Supreme Court held the safety data was an equipoise, and we know since then the safety data regarding ayahuasca has just gotten better and better on the side of ayahuasca. And so unless there's some crazy, they're just holding sacrament in such a manner that diversion is absolutely an issue. I don't think they're going to try to go after them. I mean, it's just because when you're sizing up a case based upon existing precedent and the way society and the research has changed, it's not looking good for the government in a lot of these cases. It's just not, and
and it's like, and it's just more ayahuasca churches, the same model as before. And just if you've got thousands of mushroom churches, when in Texas anyway, you've got a law HB 1802 that allows all 18.8 million veterans in the country to come here for treatment for PTSD. It sounds like people who are maybe saying, "Hey, ayahuasca sounds complicated," whatever.
Yeah,
I'm just in a mushroom church. That could provide the same kind of relief and healing. And I'm just saying, what's to stop the whole country from just doing that?
That's right. Well, and we're going to do another podcast here soon, all about veterans healing, because we're super involved. So I'd like to just let everybody know kind of what all's been going on over the last year or so, as far as, developing that. But other than that, man, I think we're about good. I just want to come on and discuss this issue. I know it's hot button for a lot of people in this space, a lot of people we've spoken with over the last probably 6 months, huge issue. So I just want to come on and give our piece on it. And obviously, as this develops, we'll continue to make videos and keep everybody informed, from our perspective, what's happening here. So
Totally.
appreciate it, Ian. I appreciate it, brother. And
Thank
we
you,
will
man.
be back on soon, man. Thank you.
All right, bro. Peace.